Hey everybody, this is Paul from This Way to Aquarium. Hope you're doing great today. In this video I want to talk about an issue I'm having with the cinder block stand here right behind me. Particularly this tank over here I just recently filled up. I filled it up halfway initially because I've got plants in there, and then the other day I filled it up the entire way, and then immediately the next day I noticed a problem with the tank. So let's take a look at that problem and see the solution that I'm working on to fix it. So here's the problem as I noted. I just recently filled up this 40-gallon over here, sitting right next to this 20-gallon long, and as you can probably see here, the wood is starting to bend a little bit in here in the middle. So initially it was only filled up halfway because I have some plants in there. As you can see by this line over here, this algae / biofilm line, it was filled up to that point only for a little while, but once I filled it up completely, then the next day I noticed it starting to lean, as you can see here. Might be able to see here too, kind of these two tanks over here, how they're kind of leaning in towards each other a little more towards the top. Another telltale sign here is at the top of the stand over here, if I can get a good picture of it. You can see there's a gap. So basically the wood is leaning more on this edge, and it's not even touching on that edge over there. So in terms of the weight, it's possible I miscalculated thinking that this would handle, these are 2x6x10 pieces of wood, so 2x6 supposed to be pretty sturdy, so maybe I miscalculated in thinking, okay, this will be fine over here. Also possibility, when you purchase these wood pieces from these big box stores, you're not necessarily getting the best quality. So it's just possible that this wood is not all that up to snuff. Please ignore the algae in all these tanks over here. These are relatively new tanks, about 3 to 4 weeks set up. And so they're kind of going through their paces right now, getting established, getting a balance. So the algae is kind of running strong in both of these tanks here, this upper one, this lower one, and this upper one. And this one I'm going to let the algae run a little out of control because I've got two Julidachromis in there that are breeding pair, and I want the fry when they hatch to be able to have some stuff to munch on. So basically the fix I'm thinking for this is, as you can see, I've got plenty of space between this tank and the wall over here, as well as this other 40-gallon over here. So I've got about 5 to 6 inches on each side, and then here's a 75-gallon on this side over here. As this is a little closer to this wall over here, I don't think it's going to be a problem, but I'm still going to address it just to make sure it isn't a problem in the future. So basically what I've got in mind is I'm going to move this tank over here further closer to that wall over there. Similarly, I've got room on this side over here and this side over here, so I plan on taking this support over here and sliding it over so it's directly under this tank over here. Same thing over here. I'm going to add some more supports over here directly up above this here, and then I should have enough room to slide this tank over. And so with the cinder blocks that I'm using right now, these cinder blocks here are 8x8x16 going in. So I've purchased some other cinder blocks. These are 4x8x16s that I'm going to use instead. So I'm going to, basically I need to drain this tank over here. These tanks luckily only have sand in them, no water. Take those tanks off. Now this tank doesn't have any inhabitants in there other than plants. These two tanks here, this 20-gallon here and this 40-gallon down over here, they do have fish in there, Tanganyikan fish. So I'm hoping that I can get away without draining this tank at all, especially since I think they have some eggs in there that they're guarding and taking care of. I don't really want to drain it, mess with the eggs in there and bother the fish. So if I can get away without draining it, I'm going to do that. So this one I'm definitely going to have to drain and pull it out so I can set up the other blocks over here, the other cement blocks underneath at this point here. So it's going to come up under here. It'll come up under here, kind of support it, and go straight down, and I'll add some to the base over there. So that's what I'm thinking in terms of the fix. I think once I add the supports in there, there'll be a support. It'll be pushed down over there. It should give me some room to move the tanks. And the one big thing is too, since I'm using a smaller block, since I'm rather than using an 8-inch this way, I'll be using a 4-inch. It gives me a little more space, and we'll see about how that 40-gallon fits. So I did already purchase the cinder blocks here that are going to be the added support. I've got 8 total. I need to paint them. I'm going to paint them today here, so they should be ready for replacement tomorrow. I do have on order too, that should be coming today from Amazon, a transfer pump. That's just going to make it easier to transfer this water. I've got a garden hose already down here in the basement, and I'll just connect it directly and then pump the water out. Now, in terms of the fish, probably going to net them out. Best bet might be just to move them into a bucket, and I'll be doing that tomorrow, as I mentioned, after I've painted the blocks. And once that's done, then I should have a little different setup over here with the stand. And if based on the spacing I am able to still fit both of these 40 tanks here in the bottom, I might have space for another small tank, another nano tank, which we'll see. If not, there'll just be a gap over there, and I can probably create some storage as well too. You always need storage with these fish rooms. So I finished resetting the stand over here. As you can see, I've got this support here directly under the 40-gallon and 20-gallon, and another support here under the 75-gallon and the 40-gallon other side. So I did miscalculate in terms of what I thought I could do on the bottom there. I thought I would be able to put this second 40-gallon tank over here next to it, but unfortunately I do not have enough room. So in this space right here, I've got about 34 inches, and in this space over here, I got about 21 inches. So theoretically, I could have moved the stand over a little bit more to get me 36 inches. It would have been tight, but I really wanted to put that directly under the 40-gallon, based on the way the wood was bending prior. So I put it under there. So with having 34 inches, obviously this 36-inch 40-gallon breeder tank won't fit. So I will be using that somewhere else later on. But on the upside, I can fit a 29-gallon tank there, and the plan that I had for this 40-gallon breeder basically would be the same type of fish, just a smaller footprint tank, and it would work just as well in this space over here. So in this space, I do have enough space for a 10-gallon tank, which I do have an unused 10-gallon tank that'll fit in there perfectly. Likely what I'll do is, since it's so low and it's a 10 gallons, a smaller tank, I'm going to build some sort of platform and just raise it up so it's a little bit higher. And depending on that 10-gallon, I bought 2 10 gallons mainly to use as grow-out tanks or quarantine tanks. So we'll see what I do with that, if I decide to make it some sort of planted display tank with some fish in there, or just keep it as a quarantine grow-out tank, especially if these Julita chromas here in this tank over here had fry in the past in my tank upstairs when they were upstairs. So they're exhibiting behavior that would suggest that they're protecting eggs over there. So their fry might be transferred to the 10-gallon tank once they're big enough. So with these tanks, I did have to drain that one completely. That one was also completely drained. Most of the water that I was able to drain, the fish went into a bucket. There's no fish in this tank. And for this tank, I was trying to avoid draining it, but ultimately I did have to drain about halfway just to lighten it up, just so I could adjust the tank, because it did shift a little bit when I was adjusting these wood planks over here. So overall looking good, but happier with the current support system. As you can see, this tank is full with water now, and I'm not seeing any bends in there, and I checked the levels of these tanks and they're spot on. So moving those tanks and adjusting everything wasn't easy. There was a lot of weight involved there, especially with these larger tanks. I did need help. Luckily my son was in town, so he was able to help me out moving these tanks. So it did take about at least half of the day, 3/4 of the day, just to get everything done. It included draining the tanks, moving the fish. I painted the cinder block the day before just so it could dry and have time to dry. And when I stacked it up in there, pulling out the old cinder blocks and then popping everything in and then putting the tanks back. So now that's all done. I'm looking back at it now. What would I do differently in the future if I were going to do this again? So I have seen other types of builds online involving cinder block and wood. I've seen the kind where they stack up 2x4s on top of the cinder block and then place plywood on top of that so you can line tanks up. So that's another possibility. I don't know if it would have worked for this because I've got some larger tanks. I've got that 75 gallon there, the 40 gallon. If you were using smaller tanks, say 20 gallons, 10 gallons, then that might work better. Because of the cinder block, you got about 16 inches. And if you're spacing 3 2x4s evenly on top of it, and then your plywood on top of that, you're not going to have room to put a larger tank in there that has a bigger footprint than 16 inches. So that would work great for your smaller tanks, not necessarily for the bigger tanks. Like in this case, since I have the bigger tanks, I wanted something where I could spread out the wood pieces, the planks over here, so that way the four corners of all those large tanks also have some place to rest on. That gives the tank more stability, less likely to have any issues. So some other things I would do differently. There's one video I did see online that mentioned, hey, if you get some wood, you know, that's got a little bit of a bend in it, that's fine, go ahead and use it. I would say no, that's not the case. The wood that I used, I purchased from a local big box store over here. So most of it was fine. I tried to eyeball it and get it straight as possible, but there were still some bends in there. And then watching this video, I thought, okay, that'd be fine. The biggest problem I found with that too is depending on which side the bend is facing. When you're adjusting the wood, like especially this length here, you got a 10-foot length behind me. And so when you're adjusting it, if it's bowed inward like this and it's on a point like that and you start pivoting it, it doesn't really go in straight basically. You know, if you want it to adjust on a certain angle by being on that pivot point, it makes it difficult to adjust. So if I were going to do it again, rather than going to a big box store, I've got a local lumber yard here, and they'll give you quality pieces of wood, strong pieces of wood, good hardwood that are pretty much cut to square, cut to rectangle. No bends, no waviness, no weird shapes. So you pay a little more for that. But in this situation where you're already going economical as it is for an aquarium stand, I think the added expense for the wood that's straight, that's better quality, is going to do you better in the long run. So even in cases where I have the wood laid out here where it's basically on the flat end and side by side, I've seen other videos where people put plywood on top of that. That is a possibility if I ever did something like that in the future. I think that plywood would add a little bit more stability, and that even if your planks underneath kind of shift around a little bit when you're initially setting it up, that plywood on top, as long as it's got supported properly, it's thick enough, it's going to give you good support in your tank. And it adds a little bit of thickness depending on the size of the plywood that you get. But I think overall it helps. It adds a little bit of expense as well too, but ultimately these types of stands, these cinder block stands, it depends on how fancy you want to go. In a lot of cases you can just go grab the cinder blocks, bare wood, stack it up, pop the wood on, put your tank on, and you're good to go. In my case, I wanted to paint it, I wanted to make it look a little nicer, especially when you got the videos going on here, you got these black curtains in back. Less distracting, you're looking more at the tanks rather than the stand. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you think about plywood and cinder block stands? Have you used them in the past? How have you set them up? Have they been successful? Have they not been successful? What are suggestions that you would provide for making an overall better stand, more stable, more secure stand? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.